So right now I'm going to do a video about Atlantis until I have to go to work. Kind of like a book review synopsis of Atlantis, the Antediluvian World by Ignatius Donnelly. Yeah, it's a really cool book. It was written like 1888. Why am I wearing these? It was written in like 1888 in America. He was a American congressman from like, I don't know, Minnesota or something like that. He started a commune, like a hippie commune. But it failed, and then at the end he was the only one left in the commune, and that's where he wrote his book about Atlantis. And yeah, I guess he was a really good politician too. He fought for poor people's rights and stuff, and so obviously he was only a one-term congressman, but yeah, he was one of those badasses. And then he got really rich when he wrote the book because it was like a bestseller. This is the really weird thing about that book. He wrote the book. It became a bestseller. You know, like the most biggest, like when one of like #1 bestseller. So it's like the talk of the town, right? Everybody's into it. It's the most. It's a brilliant book, and yeah, and then like 150 years later or whatever, 120 years later, he's like invisible again, and nobody. We kind of default back to thinking the world is like flat. It's weird, because if you Wikipedia Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, it's called a pseudoscientific book on Wikipedia. So the mainstream, consciousness still considers it a pseudoscientific book. The way Wikipedia works is it's kind of like it's like a democracy. So if you write a Wikipedia article and somebody else doesn't like it, you go onto the discussion page, and then whoever like wins the votes or whatever gets to put the thing up. So, democratically, the scholars, college professors and stuff, the kind of people who on their spare time write Wikipedia articles, the consensus says it's a pseudoscientific book, which is not right. It's not a pseudoscientific book. People become pseudoscientific when you present them with science that they're conditioned to not believe because it's too outside of their concept. They can't picture a world civilization before our time, even though the world's been around forever. So they just go, pseudoscience, It's weird. But yeah, it's not a pseudoscientific book. I think one of the reasons, though, that people can say that it is because it's a stupid reason, but the only person who mentioned Atlantis in the past, in the story and in all its detail was Plato. And so with one person, that's not science because it's just one guy. Well, all the stuff that Plato talks about has been mentioned a bunch of times, the names that he talks about. So if you wanted to piece it all together, Plato's he's the only guy who told the actual story of Atlantis, but he's not the only person who talks about the existence of Atlantis. And for example, everybody knew the world was round. I'll talk about this later, but yeah, everybody knew the world was round, and the Scythians and the Egyptians, and everybody knew that the world was covered by an ocean back in those days because of the leftover knowledge from the world culture. It's also not a pseudoscientific book. It's not fair to call it a pseudoscientific book because the whole book is a compilation of data, from myths and legends and archaeological sites. I mean, if that's not science, what is? It's really bizarre. I mean, I'm not going to go in there and try to argue and say, oh, I don't know, it's science, but whatever. It's just funny. Yeah, so I'll just do like a synopsis, like remember what I read of it. I read it, listened to it. I never read it. I listened to it a bunch of times, and I started listening to other stuff. I should have done this video then, but I wasn't doing videos. So yeah, it's basically, it starts with Plato, and he basically talks about all of the evidence of a worldly civilization, somewhere in the Atlantic. Ignatius Donnelly wrote the book, and it was amazing because he talked about a lot of stuff, like giants and pyramids and stuff, and about the giants he was talking about, but none of the mummies had been found. 20 years after the publication of his book, and he did write another book. I should read it. I should find it. But not until like 20 years, like 1910s and stuff, did they start finding giant mummies. So, he would have, his book, so like what he wrote in his book got even more and more confirmed, yet his book kind of just floats away. So, yeah, he just talks about all the evidence. So let me just relist all the evidence that he wrote. He was really smart, really, really smart. His idea was that the gods of ancient Greece were just kings of Atlantis, and I agree with that. And that was a revolutionary idea in those days. That was back in the days, back in like the 1880s and stuff. It was the kind of the waking up of the world culture. So we had, people exploring. They found the Nile for the first time, and Heinrich Schliemann dug up Troy for the first time. Hiram Bingham found Machu Picchu. They dug up 70,000 scrolls in the Middle East. All this discovery was happening. So for the first time, people were starting to, like, for example, the guy who found Troy based on descriptions of where it was from ancient texts, okay? Because before that, people were like, these ancient texts, these people just making shit up. We're not interested in that. It's not true. But he said, no, they were smart. They described, it was this many miles from this mountain and here, and I'll go look because it's true. So he found it and it was right. And so then other people did it and they found it and it got really excited. And so people started taking ancient religious texts and stuff seriously. And that's kind of the beginning of fundamentalist Christianity, fundamentalism, where you actually believe it really happened. But then when you have a lot of stupid people signing on to it, they actually believe that the fantastical stories, like God opening up earth and all of Moses' enemies falling into the earth and then it closing up again just because Moses didn't like him, stories like that. That's not what I mean by fundamentalist Christian believing actual happened, but like the stories, they're not just made up, Like I was talking to my brother a few days ago, and he's like, "What, Zeus and those guys? It's just made up fiction." I'm like, "No, like people, kings and stuff. If it happened long ago, you forget who they were, and then it's not. You don't have such good written language. It gets distorted and confused, and different heroes of the same name get like melded together. For example." Hercules, there was Hercules the king from Egypt, and then you had Hercules the hero, from Greece, and they kind of mixed those up. Anyway, so it's cool to have it, to go back to the fundamentalists and actually believe that stuff and respect our ancient historians and piece it together scientifically, and not go, "Oh no, you made it all up, pseudoscience." Yeah, right. And then the same fucking asshole who calls it pseudoscience is going to turn around and be like, "Let's go to church and pray to Jesus so that he can come back to earth on 4 white horses because it's written in the Bible." Come on, man. We got to know where the line is between science and non-science. So, what's this book called? Or what's the book about? So he starts with Plato. So let me start with Plato. Plato was an ancient Greek philosopher who wrote a bunch of books. He lived like 450 BC, like in the golden age of Greece. He was the student of Socrates, and he wrote a book about like his stuff that he had learned from his grandfather, who was a sage, who was a descendant of Solon. So Plato was a descendant of Solon, the ancient sage from 700 BC, who is featured in Herodotus' book. Solon traveled down to Egypt, and he was hanging out with Egyptian priests in Sais, and they were telling him about Egyptian history. And I heard about Egyptian history also from Solon, actually, the story of Solon, on Herodotus' histories, because Herodotus came around the same time as Plato. I think they lived around the same time. Herodotus was maybe a little bit older. So, and Herodotus said the same thing, that in Sais they had the priests. Their priest lineage went back 300 priests, and Herodotus said that back then they considered a generation to be 33 years, which is pretty interesting because I think my mom was 33 when I was born. So then he calculated it 300, and he said like 10 to 11,000 years ago or something like that. 10,000 years ago is how far back that singular lineage had gone down in Greece. Now, it's kind of interesting, Egypt. So it's kind of interesting to think about how in the ancient world, in the time of Herodotus, their recorded history went back farther than ours does now. You know, our recorded history goes to about the time of Herodotus, 2,500 years. Their history goes back 10,000 years, or 8,000, or like 12,000 years, 8,000 years before us. So that's kind of interesting. You know, we've gone backward. The Library of Alexandria was burnt down. That had a lot of documents, but stuff is always burning down. You know, being destroyed. And back then, it was a really peaceful world. And this is another thing that Ignatius Donnelly was talking about. And I'll just go in and talk about that right now. Back then, in the ancient days of Herodotus, okay, Herodotus is his father of history, the first person to kind of write an anthological history of the world from a scientific viewpoint. And a lot of people didn't believe him because, you know, he's kind of like the only guy who did that, you know, so they wouldn't believe it until they could find backup evidence, and then they believe it more and more. And so nowadays he gets a lot more credit than he did before. But he talked about all sorts of crazy stuff, all the different tribes and all the different stuff, and so you get a good idea of what the ancient world was back then. And the ancient world back in the time of Herodotus had been around for as long as anybody could remember. I mean, it had been with the same, and all the different tribes all over the known world, the Scythians and everybody, all had the same gods. They all knew the same gods. It was like one world culture back in those days. That was a remnant of a culture even before that. So that's where all of the, you know, like all of the Greek gods and stuff, they weren't just Greek gods. They had the same name in the Middle East and in Scythians, as well as, which is like Ukraine, as well as Egypt and everything. They were all part of remnants of the same worldly culture because they all had remembered the same God, you know. Or either that, or they were all part of the same trading culture. And they did trade and stuff, but it points more to they're all remnants because Herodotus was talking about Hercules, and he said that Hercules originally came from Egypt, and that the Greeks got Hercules from Egypt. And he talked about a lot of other stuff that the Greeks inherited from Egypt too, and that it was originally in Greece. And he said that the Egyptian culture had been around since the beginning of time. And he said that Herodotus said that the Egyptian delta was only 10,000 years old because he was calculating, you know, like how quickly the silt gets deposited in the delta, and he said that there's that just the priest list of Sais goes back that far, and so there was no Egypt, you know, most of Egypt is the delta, and so there was no Egypt then, so they obviously came from somewhere else. That's what Herodotus said, and even farther, you know, than that. So and they also knew. Herodotus said that the Egyptians knew that the world was round and that Africa was surrounded by an ocean, even though nobody had ever been there. They just knew it. He didn't say why they knew it, but they knew it. The Scythians also knew that. The Scythians knew that the world was round and that it was surrounded by an ocean. Because even though they're nomads, you know, they still have connection to the civilized world. You know, they're just, because a lot of people go out there and then become nomads. You know, it's just different lifestyle based on the environment that they live in. But because one of the ancient, I think it was Egyptian pharaohs. Some dude got guy high up got in trouble for sleeping with his wife or something, sleeping with the pharaoh's wife, and so he was going to get killed. But the pharaoh said no, or the pharaoh's wife or mother said no, send him on an expedition to go around Africa, and if he gets around Africa, then you know, forgive him. So he sent him on an expedition to go around Africa, but he didn't go around Africa. He came down and he said, you know, he found the jungle people and the equator and who ran away from him when he got off, and that he didn't mistreat them and all this stuff. But he couldn't go any farther south because the boat just got stuck in mud. And so the pharaoh said, "Oh, you're an idiot. You're just lying." So he killed him. So the guy basically chickened out and turned around and came back. So back in the ancient world, they weren't as adventurous as they were, you know, in the last couple hundred years. But they were even more adventurous in the past because they had legends of another Egyptian who had gone all the way around. They just hadn't done it since. So anyway, so that's remnants. It just points to remnants of an ancient culture. Okay, and now back to how Egypt was very, very, very peaceful. Okay, back in those days, Egypt was officially like, because Herodotus talks about the political structure of Egypt. Egypt was divided into like 18 different. I think they were called nomes, which is like a state, and each nome was basically independent of each other. They had their own gods, they had their own festivals, and they had their own everything. The only thing that brought Egypt together was, they would have like their head nome, their head capital, and he would call everybody together to field an army mainly, because they had it very like organized. They had a warrior class in ancient Egypt that all they did was fight and train. So they had a professional army in Egypt, and each like soldier got like a certain amount of hectares and stuff. They even said how much it was. Like, I'm going to make a chart of it on my website. Herodotus was actually very good, very well describing exactly how much space and size of land and crops different people in the social order had. It's pretty cool. And how many slaves they got and all that kind of stuff. But so Egypt was very organized, and it was kind of organized on a cooperative structure where it wasn't so much central power, and the central power would move around, from one nome to the other. That's when they would change the capitals from like Alexandria to Sais up to Heliopolis. And that's kind of like different nomes taking over, It's kind of like now Colorado's in charge. Now, well, kind of like how England was, now, these different, but it's all the same culture, and it was a very peaceful culture, is what I'm saying. And the women had a lot of rights in Egypt, and not just Egypt, but the whole of the ancient world, but especially Egypt. The head priest of the country was never a woman, but other than that, the women had just as many rights as the men, and they were very clean, and they were very, they had a very fleshed out, very ancient society with a very detailed legends of their gods, and that they were giants, like it was 13 cubits high, I think, was Osiris or somebody. And then, but for the last 10,000 years, the giants, or after the gods died, after living for like ever, for like 15,000 years or something, then it was only humans. And for the last 10,000 years, it was only humans in Egypt. That's what Herodotus was talking about. But so Egypt has a history of very ancient and very wise from a long time back. And also, if you look at the architecture, you have the pyramids. Herodotus said that the pyramids were more. I guess I'll turn this video into Herodotus and Ignatius Donnelly. Said the pyramids were more amazing than any of the works in ancient Greece, obviously. But he said that there was this labyrinth that was even more amazing than the pyramids, that was up there right at the mouth of the Canobic mouth, or is that what it's called? No, the mouth that goes into the lake of Moeris. Maybe I'll show it on my computer. Here, let me show you this, because this is really interesting. I'll make this like an anthology kind of video. Okay, I'll show this later. So let's go to Egypt really quick. So, okay, so this is Egypt, right? Now this lake here is called Lake Moeris. This is an artificial lake, and Herodotus said who built that lake, and I think it was one of the earliest. It was like Menes. It was like the very earliest king. And they said how they built that lake. They just dug it out, and then they just put the silt in the river and let the river carry it down. But he said at the mouth of this, here, maybe I'll even show you exactly where. Herodotus said at the mouth of this lake, right about there, there's a pyramid around here somewhere. Well, right next to this pyramid was this big labyrinth that was like 100. You can just type Herodotus labyrinth, because people have written descriptions of it. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was underground, it was overground. Oh, and he said there were 2 big pyramids on this island as well. But it was like all these labyrinths and pillars and stuff, and all the pyramids and all the giant statues is like, how the hell did they build it? Actually, Herodotus describes the building of the Great Pyramid. He said that, who was it? Khufu and Khafre, those guys, he was like Egypt was totally peaceful until then. Everybody was happy, and then he came along and he made everybody slaves building the goddamn pyramid, and that everybody hated the pyramid after that for like a long time. So I believe it. I mean, but they just must have had a certain technology that we don't know about, like some kind of levitation technology or something. And also, it also shows how organized they were. It's not that they were slaves; it was that they were very organized and they were very wealthy. They can their crops go very well. They like all of these canals in ancient Egypt, that, as you see here, I'll show you. Because back before they built the dam, Aswan, Egypt would naturally flood this entire area every spring. And if you zoom in and you look at all of, like this, for example, right? All of these dikes that flood, those dikes were built 5,000 years ago. These dikes have been there since the beginning of motherfucking time, okay? Now look at this dike, for example. This dike, the original dike that goes from Egypt to the, I think this is the one, from Egypt to the Red Sea, the original, whatever you call it, Suez Canal. This was made. I can't remember who it was, but it was. I think it was about 1500 BC or something. I can't remember, but it was one of those pyramid pharaohs. He said which one, and that you could put 2 triremes breast to breast. So all you have to do is measure this, know what half of it is, and you'll know what the trireme. You can even guess the size of the trireme. But this stuff was built long ago. Like all these stuff. This was actually, Herodotus described which pharaoh it was exactly who ruined the road system here, because he built all the dikes, and after that people could only walk around or take boats around. And he described what pharaoh it was. Herodotus, let me show you just one thing also really quick. Herodotus also said that when Cyrus the Great took over Babylon, he created a lake. He diverted the river and created an artificial lake. This lake here is an artificial lake created by, I think it was Necrosis. This is like 2000 BC, like way before Cyrus or something. Made this lake by diverting the river here down into it, so that you could make this river really little, so that you could make dikes and stuff, and then let the water go through. And so all these to make it really wiggly and jiggly like this. This is all artificial, made 2,000 years ago. And so Cyrus made this fill up really big to make this really small, to make the river really small, so that they could sneak under the river and steal and take over Babylon. So anyway, this stuff that you can see from space, like it's artificial, and it was built a long ass time ago. It's really interesting. So and we know when it was built and who built it. All you have to do is read Herodotus. So basically, my point is that the world was very ancient. It was very set in its ways. And it was kind of like a remnant of an ancient civilization, and that's what Ignatius Donnelly was talking about ancient Greece, ancient Egypt, because the world has devolved in a lot of ways since then. And if the world continuously devolves, that means that there was an artificial high level a long time ago set by somebody else, by an outside force, and that's what Ignatius Donnelly said, that the Egyptians, and actually other people, Maspero, say that the Egyptian idea was that, all of the civilization, like, we don't make this, like, somebody else brought it, those gods. And so, but yeah, if you look at the way the society is it kind of devolves and degenerates and becomes, more and more sexist, more and more wars and stuff, because it was like a remnant of a civilization put in place that over time it just evolved because the people weren't ready for it, It's kind of like, now I have my own particular theory about that. So let me go ahead and talk about that right now, okay? Let me tell you what I think Atlantis is, personally, and then I'll get going back about talking about Ignatius Donnelly, okay? This is kind of like a anthology video. This is going to end up being a really long video. I'll talk until I have to go to work. So my personal idea about Atlantis is that we are... the way that the human souls evolve is that you evolve, and this is actually what the ancients believed. The ancient Egyptians believed that every single, and this is written by Herodotus, every single person on the planet is a human being, and then when you die, you're reincarnated as another animal, And then when you die as that animal, you're reincarnated as another animal. And so you do one life per animal, per species of animal, and that takes you 3,000 years to do that cycle, and then you get to be a human again. That's how they thought reincarnation worked in ancient Egypt. They believed in reincarnation, but it was kind of like tarot cards. It was like little kids in cartoons or video games. It was like, now I'm a human, and then you get to be a bird. But you know what that means? It means that they would look at animals as equal as humans. Now that is way more advanced than we are even now. They loved cats. Whenever there was a house burning down, they would run into the fire and commit suicide trying to save cats. They would embalm their cats. They would bury their cats. Their cats, they treated their cats like us Americans treat our cats now, or even better. They loved animals. Now, I think that's also related to the ancient biblical story about how when the days when animals could talk. I think when they mean back in the days when animals could talk, remember before Noah, he talked to the animals. I think because that's when you could kind of telepathically communicate with animals, because you could, or at least that's too hippie, that'll freak people out. You could empathize with animals and see and look at animals as your friend, not just your dog, but all animals, because you see them as reincarnations of human. I mean, if you actually see them as reincarnation of human, oh my God. But yeah, so that's advanced. And that's actually interesting because the 3,000 year cycle of reincarnation is actually a Vedic cycle from the ancient Indian religion, and I'll go back to all the similarities with Indian, Vedic, Mahabharata, and all that kind of stuff. Religion that has to do with the rest of the world, because that ties in as well. It's the same. It's remnants of the same world culture. So, yeah. So they kind of degenerated, after that we decide that animals don't even have souls, we forget why they're called animals, anima, soul. We kind of forget and become and devolve because it was like set up. We had Atlantis, the world culture in the past. So, and also women were also treated very well in ancient Greece. If you, or at least more than they were after that, it was like, in a lot of ways, it was the women who were actually on charge of everything in Greece, because Greece was a collection of like two different races, the Ionians and the Dorians, who were collectively known as Hellenes, or maybe it was the Dorians and the Hellenes, but they were just Greeks, and they all kind of it was like a federation, okay? So they were all different city-states who were independent, and they would fight each other and stuff, but they would also could get together and fight against the Persians when they went and tried to take over. So it was kind of like one big country. And so if you want to think of ancient Greece as one big country, their capital was Delphi. And whenever one guy within, from representing a state within the country of Greece, say Athens, wanted to fight another one, Sparta. I don't know, this isn't exactly an example, but it's given throughout the book. And I can't remember. I think they were going to try to fight Malesia once, and they were going to try to go after Samos once. Well, anyway, before they go and fight anybody, you had to go to the oracle and ask the oracle, who was always a woman, and she would tell you if it was okay to fight and what would happen, and they would basically do what the oracle said, and they believed that stuff. I mean, they believed dreams. If you had a dream, it always had to come true. No matter what. And Herodotus was very scientific when he talked, but when it came to that stuff, he made sure to write it down. And he's like, oh yeah, the dream portended, the prophetess said. So yeah, man, it was all about, if you think about, these guys went to war with these guys, and if some hippie bitch is all, fucking men always going to war, the women are like, oh, we should be peace. No, dude, it was the fucking Pythian prophetess who said that they should go to war. They don't go to war unless Pythian prophetess says so. Not just Pythian prophetess is the prophetess from Delphi, who would get high on some steam vapor that was underground and go crazy, and then start talking in tongues, and they decipher it. I think they did find remnants of that anyway, the vapor cave, but that they had prophetesses from other places too. But anyway, it was a lot more of a world culture, than people realize. People kind of think, different tribes and not communicating with each other. But even the Scythians, the nomads, they had the same gods, like I said, and they knew the world was round. So anyways, in the book, in Ignatius Donnelly, he started talking about the same kinds of traditions in all the other parts of the world and how it's really similar to ancient Greece or in ancient Egypt. For example, the Vedic, the different flood stories. Everybody has a flood story, and there was a flood story of in Native American, and I'll do this all better, when I fix up the page on my website, but. Native American mythology in a few places, there was a story of a flood where the fish said that you saved me and all, and Manu, fish flood of Manu, and I'll tell you about the flood that's coming, and then I'll warn you about it, and then you save me, and because the big fish will eat me and stuff. And so that story is in one of the Vedas, the same story. There's seven cities in ancient Mayan civilization when the Spaniards went, called like Mochipan, Temaku, or whatever. And anyways, they had those 7 cities were in Armenia. And Armenia is one of it's like the same name. And Armenia is one of the oldest civilizations in the world, with king lists that go back the farther and that oldest history. And that kind of supports the theory that, when Atlantis sunk and people escaped, they would like refound cities in the same name as the other one, like New York, and then let's see. So let's talk about the similarities. That was all I remember him talking about ancient the Vedas, but no, there was a section where he was talking about the Vedic astrology and Western astrology and how they came. He proved how they came from the same astrology, and that they line up. But it was complicated, and I should read that again. I'll do a video about that later. But the astrology lines up. If people think about astrology, everybody believes in astrology all over the world. They have Indian astrology, Chinese astrology, European astrology. Well, why do we all have the same astrology? It's because it's remnants of the same world culture. Like the world culture, and this is what Ignatius Donnelly talked about a lot. The culture that we have now is the culture of Atlantis. The culture that we inherited from Atlantis never went away. For example, the Halloween, the holiday Halloween is, how people dress up like ghosts and dead people and stuff. It's called Day of the Dead. Halloween was a like a pagan holiday in Europe, but it was also the same holiday existed in Mexico and the Mayans before Europeans even came here, because it came from the same starting. It was called Day of the Dead there, and it's to commemorate the last day of Atlanteans before they were destroyed, because now they're all dead now. But not just that, but our alphabet. If you look at the alphabet, you can trace all the different syllables, letters. There's like 22 letters, I think, to the Mayan alphabet, and you can trace and connect them and see how they evolved from a pictograph, originally a pictograph, to then a letter, and then devolved again to other people's letters, because like languages change into something completely unrecognizable from its father language, like immediately. You don't have to. Stuff doesn't have to be like totally exact. For example, Cyrillic was invented in like the year 800 out of Latin, just because some dude in like Russia or something wanted to have like a code language so that he could have extra military, trade secrets or whatever, and then all of a sudden everybody reads Cyrillic, and you only can't even read it, but it comes right out of Latin. It was just invented out of thin air like 800 years ago. So yeah, he showed how all of it's related, and and he showed how Hebrew and Phoenician were related. Hebrew, I think, has like 22 letters, and Phoenician has like 22, and then like Rome added like 4 more, like OH or whatever, and Y but the original letters had been since the beginning since like the beginning, and one of those ancient Roman. Okay, I'm about to run out of juice. When this runs out, I'll just use the other camera. One of the ancient Roman philosophers, I can't remember, mentioned that letters had always been in existence, always. The Latin alphabet was modeled off of Greek, which was modeled off of Phoenician, which didn't really have a beginning. Phoenicians were related to the Hebrews. And the Phoenician languages are related to the Hebrew language. So, and the Phoenicians were like the traders, the sea people, the traders. Their capitals were like in Tyre, and then they moved off and started Carthage, and it was like modern day Lebanon, I think. But they had a written language, but they were nomad type of traders. Okay, it was a phonetic language. But I think one of those old historians said that the Phoenicians had like 300 cities on the western coast of Africa. There were like Phoenician settlements on southern tip of Saudi Arabia. So it's like when you say Phoenician, it's like, are you talking about like some world culture? So no, it was basically just a bunch of pirates and traders and stuff speaking the remnants of a common language from the days of Atlantis, and that's who the Hebrews came out of, and so you're basically dealing with the remnants of an old culture. Now, one thing interesting to talk about this, think about this, is because Plato said that 9,000 years before his time is when Atlantis sunk. So he was at 500 BC. So we're talking 11,500 years ago is when Atlantis sunk, according to Plato, which I would say is pretty accurate because the Egyptians are pretty good at math. And, if they told Solon it was that long, then I guess you believe it. So then if you want to think, okay, so how long would it take, like the legend of like, say, Julius Caesar and stuff, if we were to all basically become kind of illiterate, to devolve into Julius Caesar, the god who like rode upon the horse and took over the giant Gaul demons or whatever, like how long would it take for that to get distorted that much? And I don't know, the way that I see is distorting gods of ancient Greece, like Zeus and the pantheon of the family, and how, Uranus tried to eat the 7 kids and all the different mixture. That seems to me like that's about a level of distortion that you would arrive at after about 9,000 years of a loose mixture of written history and word history. Because written history, even if you have written language, it's not going to get translated word for word down through a series of 9,000 years, because books get destroyed. Like whenever you have a history book, whatever history book was written off of another history book that doesn't even exist anymore, right? So it's just random fragmentary collections of bits and pieces of history. Like if somebody tells you, oh, the ancient Lydians were afraid to walk around naked, well, it's because that was written like as an aside mentioning note in one book from one of the ancient writers, and so then but it was only mentioned once, But like, you have to take that sign. Why would you call that pseudoscience? Just because one guy said it, and then you say it. So yeah, calling the Atlantis book pseudoscience is just cherry picking. Anyway, so so let's talk about the similarities in the culture between North America and the Americas and Europe. Okay, so there are lots of myths and legends in the North Americas that was very similar to the ones in Europe. In Europe, we have the flood legend. Okay, well, not just the Hebrews had that flood legend, the one that we all know, but the ancient Iraqis, they were known as, I think, well, in the legends called the Chaldean legend in northern Iraq. From very, very, very early kingdom. I think it was the very beginning, like 3000 BC. They had the Epic of Gilgamesh, and that was the flood legend, where you had the warning of the flood, just like the warning of the flood from the story of Manu in the Vedas. But you also had that same story in the Mayans, that there was a warning of a flood to a guy named Noatl, which is very similar to Noah. Oh wow. And that he needed to, and that was when the days when the animals could talk, and he needed to collect. It was the same exact story. He needed to. I'm going to put it on my website. It's probably already on my website. It's just the links aren't working all that good, but you can find it, the information. It's the Native American myths and legends, but yeah, and then he needed to collect all the animals on the boat, and then they floated for. In the Old Testament, he floated for a little over a year, and the book, the size of the boat described in the Old Testament is the size of like a modern of like an 1800s sailing ocean vessel. So that tells me that the days of the Atlanteans were ocean sailors, and they could travel all over the ocean. That's what the kind of boats they had. So he, anyways, in the Mayan legend, they get he didn't float for a year. He floated for like 2 weeks or something, and then he went and landed on a boat and up a hill and started a new people. And then you have the legend of the tribe of the Mandan Indians. Here, let me go to the Mandan Indians, because they're interesting. They're a tribe of Indians, Native Americans who lived in northern Dakota, who were white people. If you look at pictures of them, they're white. And it's interesting because if you look at like modern day Native American tribes, if you go to their websites and you look at the Native Americans on there, a lot of people might think, these Native Americans are white. They're just trying to like milk the government for the government money or the gambling and shit. They're not Native Americans. Like his great-great-grandfather was Native American, but everybody else is white because look, he's white. No, it's because they looked white then. They were always white. Like, if you look at like Graham Greene or like Redskin Navajo Indians, don't think that all the people in all of North America looked like that. There were different races. You had dark-skinned Indians. You had, but then you had like, and then you had the short, squat, brown-skinned ones, and then like the taller, thin, red-skinned ones. But then you had like white people. And if you read the William Penn's History of Settlements, I can't remember what it's called, the History of New England. Well, if you read, William Penn, all the original settlers who came to America back in the early 1600s, Mayflower and that kind of stuff. It's a really big book, and there's a lot of stories about what's going on. The original settlers, when they came and moved to North America on the eastern coast, they were treated just like another group of people. They were not treated new or weird, like they were, who were these guys with the weird boats? They were just like the new white people in the new village, and they would get along and they would fight. Like they would make alliances with other Native American tribes just as much as other Native American tribes would make alliances with each other. They weren't getting singled out. And they weren't even singled out racially. Like William Penn, okay? William Penn, the guy who was given Pennsylvania by King James, said that the Iroquois Indians, or I can't remember which ones, but one of those Indians near Pennsylvania, tribes, he said he thought they were Jews. Because he said their skin was the same exact color as Mediterraneans, as Italians, and their noses look exactly like Jewish noses, and they were basically white people, and he said they were Jews, and even the way that they acted and everything, he thought they were Jews. So yeah, there were already white people living here back then, and the Mandan, who live in northern, and not just the Indians in northeastern part of America, but the Mandans, who are in northern Dakota. Okay, so look, this is the Mississippi River, which is where the Atlanteans did a lot of trading in America. Atlantean civilization was the Caribbean islands and the eastern side of America. This whole river system of America. So if you follow the Mississippi up to where it branches with the Ohio River, here's where you're going to find Cahokia Mound, and I'll show that in a bit. But then the Mississippi River goes really far up here, and then it branches out, and then it goes way up here. As a really big river that you can navigate. America's amazing. It's like Russia. It's like it's a country of navigable rivers. I'm going to do my river trip all over America when I do it. But over here in the northern part, there's a city called Mandan. I think this may even be Mandan. Let's see. My internet is really bad. Yeah, it is. That's Mandan. See, look. Even the freaking town's called Mandan. Okay. And this is a really big river. That's the Mississippi River. Okay, and these Mandans are right on the Mississippi River. Okay, so they were right on the Atlantean, right there in smack dab in the middle of Atlantean country, Atlantean territory. So they had a story, a legend that, And these are white people, and they lived in round houses. They boiled their water in like earthen jars, and they did all of these. They had a very distinct culture than the surrounding Indians. The other Indians, the Crow, who were like 100 miles to the west of them, were like dark brown, classic Indian-looking nomads. Okay, so there were, it wasn't like everybody was the same. And so the Mandans had a legend that they used to be part of one world culture, and that the president of their giant empire was in an island off towards the east, or across the water off towards the west, the east, and that there was a huge flood because one day one survivor came to their town one day saying that he was the only survivor of this huge flood, and so they commemorate the flood, the end of their civilization, with like a white buffalo dance or something that they were celebrating all the way up until the time of when Lewis and Clark went there and told the story. And and then you have the Indians here. These Indians who live here, the Delaware Indians and the Delaware River. They have a legend that there was this. Everybody was happy. There was this one world culture. Everybody spoke the same language, and then the snake priests tried to get too much power, and there was wars between the snake faction and whoever else, and then there was a big calamity where there was a big rushing of water from the sky, water from the sky, and like rain, like in the Old Testament, but there was also like comets from the sky and all kind. They said I think they were the Delaware were the ones that actually said comets from the sky, and that the water. There was an explosion in the ocean that the water flooded all the way up the river up into the land. That's what the fucking Delaware Indians say, and what else? What else are some? Oh, and then the Aztecs. The Aztecs were the big civilization when the Mexicans came, and they had their legend that they had been wandering around for like ever. Although I think they came from New Mexico and they were wandering America, and then they came down, and that they had originally came from an island off towards the east that was called Atalan. Yeah, Atalan. It was called Atalan, and that they had to, the island sank and they had to wander around for 300 years or whatever. It was more than that, and then they started Aztec. Now, the way to look at that is not that the Aztecs were the only people who were the remnants of Atlantis, but there were all these different tribes, and they all had the same legend. So if it hadn't been the Aztecs taking over and bringing that legend, it would have been the Mozitecs, some other tribe from somewhere else who got control, but they had the same legend. Everybody had the same legend because they all came from the same, but it was a word of mouth legend, and so a lot of it could get distorted. Nobody knows that better than us white people because we have all the crazy distortions of the ancient Greek gods and stuff. So let's see if I can think of any other legends. I think that's it. But yeah, he talked about a whole lot. I'm only remembering a fraction. He went off. He went nuts on the legends, all the similarity legends. Now, one really interesting thing is the whole cow motif, the whole bull, because the symbol for civilization, I think in the Americas was the cow and the bull, you have like the bull tribe and maybe the snake tribe, and I think maybe those are like political affiliations, maybe political parties from back in those days. But the bull, see, whenever you would have a civilization, trying to civilize, nomads and stuff, the big tool for civilization is the cow. Like if you're going to go and try to bring somebody into your empire, you would bring a bunch of cows, and you would say, okay, and you would teach them how to work the cows, and you'd say, okay, you guys, it's a lot better if you just build a city here, stay here, make your food here, and here's your cows, and this is how you use them. And so the cow became the symbol of civilization. So, and I think that's why, like, they loved their cows, and they had special reverence for cows in ancient Egypt. And we all know about how the Indians think about the cows, and that comes from the Vedas. And so there's another cultural similarity. But the really interesting thing that got me thinking is that they were talking about, in the ancient myths and legends, somewhere along the line, I think it may have been the Popol Vuh or not, but they were talking about how, one of these gods, whether it was, and the gods have the same names too, like Zeus in the Native American myths and legends was also the thunderbolt god, the sky god, and his name was Zoatil or something. Zoatil. So Noatal, Noah, Zoatil, Zeus. I'm gonna list all these on my website, but it's amazing how many there are. But oh shit, I lost my train of thought. They had the same legends and stuff, same people. So I guess that's that. So anyways, let me just show you America. Let me show you what I think Atlantis was. Oh yeah, and then I'll tell you what I think Atlantis was, because I actually never got around to that. So I think the capital, in one of these Native American legends, I don't remember what it was, but they said that there were 12 islands in the Dominion of Atlantis. Okay, so it looks like you could count about 12 islands. Now I think the capital of Atlantis was modern day Andros Island. That's modern day Andros Island right there. Now, this was the island of Atlantis. Okay, now all this water here is only about 10 feet deep. Okay, this battery's about to die, so I'm going to use the other camera. Okie dokie, card filled up, but I'm back. Okay, so the only way that this planet or this island could look like that is if it got washed away by a big wave of water. That's the only way the water could be 10 feet deep. How else does water get 10 feet deep, totally flat like that all around? It's not from like a volcano pushing it all up like that. So anyway, in ancient Greece or Greece, there was this tale called the fire of Deucalion, which is when Deucalion borrowed Zeus's like spaceship, chariot of the sky, and crashed it and killed a bunch of people and killed himself. Well, when Solon went to Egypt, the Egyptians told Solon that was just a distortment from the real story, that the real story was that it was a whole bunch of comets came out of the sky and destroyed the earth and started the flood that way. And so you have comets coming out of the sky destroying the earth story in ancient Egypt and also in the Americas. Well, there's another thing, is that there were comets that came out of the sky and destroyed America, destroyed all of the eastern coast of America as well as the Caribbean islands about 10,000 years ago. It's called and it even has the same date, I think. Some guy thinks it was 10,000 years ago. It's called the Carolina Bay Lakes, okay? So let's look at the Carolina Bay Lakes, because we have evidence of comets coming down and destroying right where you would think, right? So if you're an aliens flying around in space and you wanted to destroy this civilization, which was centered capital there, and it was basically this whole area was the civilization. Okay, this was their main Atlantis civilization. I would want to have a huge ass comet land right there, wipe out that area and wipe out all this area, and that would do it. And then there would be enough survivors to go and scatter around and start their little civilization and start from there. So, what would it look like then if you had a comet that came down and did that? Well, like I said before, you would have an island that looked just like this, wouldn't you? Okay, well, you would also have a bunch of pot marks all over America, on the land of America. You know, like if you threw a whole bunch of pebbles like down into the mud, and then you would see like all the little ripples of the pebbles. Well, that's what you get here. Check it out. The little holes from the pebbles. The Carolina Bay Lakes are what are the remnant of these ancient like comets that came. Lake Makawa. It's just a lake. It's a hole that filled up from a hole that when a comet came. Look at all these lakes. They're just holes. Now look at this county. Now if you go in, look at all of these little ovals. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. You can only see them from space, like I see, and they're ancient. This is like 10,000 years ago. So something came and just pepper sprayed this whole area with comets big enough to create entire lakes. Okay. Now this is an infrared area of that same exact county that I was just pointing to. This is stuff you can't even see. Like the one that I barely saw was probably one of these big ones, but look how many of them there are. They're everywhere. The whole thing got pot marked. Here, I'll X out. Here's another photo called the Carolina Bay. That's what it looks like. So anyway, so now let's go in and look at the rest of this area here really quickly, okay? So this is ancient Atlantis, okay? Now as far as the mound, this is what I'm talking about. These are Atlantean mounds that still exist. Like here at Fort Walton Mound in Fort Walton Beach, I think in Florida. This is a cemetery. My internet's kind of slow. But you see, there it is. A big old mound right there in the middle of the town. Okay, so let's continue really quickly. So there's that. I've got a lot of cool things to show on this, so just be a little bit patient. So now we have another. See, all those are mounds. Now, what would be a big city? What would be a big ass city? This is a really cool part of the video right here. What would be a really big city where you'd want to put if you had a big river time civilization? You would put a city at the convergence of the two biggest rivers, the Ohio River and the Mississippi River. So let's see where your presumed capital. Let's have a ganders. Oh wait, that's not it. The convergence of the Ohio. Well, it's actually a little bit up from the convergence. The convergence is down here, but here at Cahokia is what I'm talking about. This is St. Louis, East St. Louis. You have Cahokia Mound. Here, let's zoom in on Cahokia Mound. Because Cahokia Mound is an ancient Atlantean pyramid. Its footprint is about the same size as the Great Pyramid in Egypt. Here, let's really quickly, let's do a little 3D thing on it just so that you guys can see. Okay. So we know what we're dealing with. Okay, so that's what Cahokia Mound looks like today. It's a 2-tier pyramid. Whoops, I'm sorry if this is shaking. My bad. It's like a 2-tier pyramid. And it's just a mound, okay? It's a mound of dirt. But look how big it is. And there's lots of other mounds too. There's Cahokia. There's another mound. There's another mound there. There's a whole bunch of mounds. Now look at this. Literally right next to Cahokia Pyramid, you have this lake, which is clearly to me an artificial lake because look how square it is. Here, let's make this like this. So yeah, look how square that is. Clearly an artificial lake, and clearly very old. Like look how it's not even connected. How all this filled up with dirt between this lake and this next lake here, Canteen Lake. Now look at how Canteen Lake is actually, it's part of Horseshoe Lake, which is actually part of the ancient river that had since gone extinct. Okay? So when Cahokia Mound was built, it's obviously connected with this piece of water here because it's so freaking close. It's like a matter of, it's like the city was built right next to it. I mean, the Cahokia Mound is what, 200 feet away from that lake? And it was and all of the mounds are right next to the river all over America, so you know it's a river society. So if it was connected to this part of the river that has not been around, right? Because it's been filled up with dirt. Look, filled up with dirt for thousands of years. I mean, I don't know what a geologist would say, but I'd say 10,000 years at least. It's related to it. It's not, why would you make a Cahokia Mound that far from where there's actual river and you could do you could do trade with the other people if it was only 500 years ago. And how could a big pyramid like that turn into a mound looking like that 500 years? Because what I'm saying is, the people, if you look at Wikipedia article, the Mississippian culture, the people who made Cahokia Mound, that was thriving in like 1450. It was thriving. But in 1492, Columbus came to America. So if this big, huge Mississippian culture who have mounds that look the same, giant pyramids, and giant people built in big mounds all over America, as you can see, I mean, I could show you. These are all the good ones. I mean, there's more. In the year 1450, a big, huge, like the size of the Roman Empire, river society, and then by the time, Columbus comes, like nobody says anything about it. Nobody's heard of it, of the great empire that existed 20 years ago. And then the people come to America like in the 1600s, and the Spaniards walk them into that area in the 1500s, and nobody says anything. Nobody knows nothing. Nobody knows nothing about it until they find the actual mound, and they go, and they do a little bit of archaeology, and they find on top of the archaeology somebody made a fire 500 years ago. And so they go, oh yeah, ancient Mississippian culture. No, dude, that in order for a pyramid built out of rocks that big to look like a crumbled down pile of dirt like that would take like 10,000 years. It's an ancient Atlantean pyramid. Now let's show you some other things. Now, I don't know, I think people who've gotten this far in the video are pretty, actually it doesn't matter. See, now look, Teotihuacan. Now look at Teotihuacan. This is the pyramid of Cholula, by the way, that when I was talking about, where the guy, the Mexican, said he had the same story about it as the Tower of Babel, where they built it to save their culture. Yeah, that's the biggest pyramid in the world. It's giant, and it's just a pile of dirt. So it wasn't built like 500 years ago, like how they would say. I don't know when they would say it, but in order for something to look like that, dude, it takes like thousands of years, man. And they have pyramids. If you go to my website, you'll see hundreds of pyramids. I mean, hundreds of pictures of pyramids in China that are gigantic, just like this, bigger than this actually. And this tree's in the way. Who's the idiot? Oh, what the fuck? Tree's in the way. Can't do it. Anyway, whatever. You guys can do it. China's littered with ones just like that, or just as old. They're like mountains with huge trees on them and big pyramids, dude, that were from this ancient Atlantean culture. Now, let me show you really quickly Teotihuacan, okay, which is pretty close to Cholula. Really quickly. Where the fuck is Teotihuacan? Okay, here we go. Here, Teotihuacan. Now, Teotihuacan is that pyramid that's the same exact size as the Great Pyramid of Egypt. But look at the layout of Teotihuacan, because it kind of goes to the religion, because you have the pyramid of the sun here and the pyramid of the moon there, and the ancient religion of the ancient Egyptians, as well as the ancient Americans, from all the myths and legends, was that they all worship the sun. And also the Scythians, they worship the sun god. Now, if you think about it, that's a much more advanced religion than when you have different people who worship their own little neighborhood god, because that's like a universal god, and it's something that's you can really trip out in a way that atheists can't say, "Oh, you're an idiot," and be like, "Oh my God." I mean, it's amazing how stuff just grows out of the earth, and matter is just created out of nothing every spring. It's the sun that does that. Sun and water. It's amazing. Sun god. So they would have their pyramids, and it's also very simple because you don't have to sacrifice. Like Ignatius Donnelly was saying, the ancient religion, written from the stories and stuff, is that they would only sacrifice fruits and vegetables. That's what they would sacrifice, fruits and vegetables. The ancient Egyptians would sacrifice fruits and vegetables. Sacrificing humans is something that, and if you listen to like Herodotus and the ancient story of Egypt, sacrificing humans was always something that some crazy guy did, that you weren't supposed to do, like what some like superstitious person did. So that's a degenerative religious practice. So whoever sacrifices fruits, is more advanced. And that's what they were doing back in those times. And whoever worships the sun instead of instead of like some ancient king who now you think is like a sky god or something. So anyway, now, but let me show you a cool relationship between this, because you see how you have the sun, the pyramid of the sun and the pyramid of the moon along the path, kind of like the moon is kind of like the counterpart to the sun, maybe like the female part. Well, way up here in America, you have Aztalan State Park. Now it's called Aztalan State Park because that's what the Indians of the area called it. Geez, I wonder why. Anyway, look at Aztalan Pyramid. You have Pyramid of the Sun, which is just a mound because it was so long ago. Pyramid of the Moon, same configuration, right next to a river. Yeah. Now look, Lake Mills. Here's where the Lake Mills giants were found. I actually deleted another one, but on some mound. Now look how much respect they have for this stuff. Somebody finds a nice big ass mound with giants inside it, and so what do? They put the giants in the Smithsonian underground. They mow down the mound and they pave over a fucking parking lot over it. But see, that's next to a lake, so that's where you would think like an ancient nice city would be. These lakes here, now these lakes are probably, I wouldn't be surprised if they're artificial lakes, you know, created, because there were some other giants found here near Madison, I didn't. And then you have the Lake Devilen giants, which you can look up, dude, on Google, and you'll see the pictures of them. Effigy mounds, you can't really see them from Google Earth, but it was one of the effigy mounds here where they had an effigy of an elephant. But they didn't have elephants in America, but if they had a world culture, they had elephants. And so that's pretty trippy that they knew about elephants, just more proof. You can't see it here, but you can see lots of other different mounds and stuff. Anyway, right next to the river, the Mississippi River, it's all right next to the river. Maple Creek mounds, Dixon mounds. Here's where most of the giants were found, here in like Minnesota, near Lake Minnesota. Now up here on Lake Superior, Ignatius Donnelly was saying, and you can't see it, like people here, like, I think they deliberately fucking hide this shit, but there's a trench that's built along here, and also in this island here, that they did, and this guy was writing about this in the 1880s, where they found remnants of ancient mines. There was like a hole like 30 feet deep. There was a trench that was like 2 miles long. They basically, the amount of iron ore that they took out of that island was as much iron ore as it would take like an industrial country like 20 years to take out. I can't remember the number, but it was like astonishing. It was huge. They had a huge industry going on back in those days. But people like to hide this stuff because they cheat. People cheat and they lie to keep the world simple. Okay, so anyway, I don't think I'll waste your time showing you all these, but but there are a lot of really good looking intact mounds that look like really nice mounds. This is just like a random one. Maybe I won't zoom in on that. But you have the snake mound. There's a snake mound here. Let's see if I can find the snake mound. Sorry, just a second. No, I can't. Oh yeah, here we are. Serpent mound. Check it out, serpent mound. Oh, I sure have to zoom in fast. Is there a faster way to zoom in on this? I should know. Okay, where did that go? Okay, here we are. Sorry, I'll figure out a faster way. There's the serpent mound. Ta-da! From the serpent cult. Right next to a river. Anyway, I won't bore you with this, but I'll do a specific video about this, zooming in really fast and stuff. Oh look, you can zoom in on it. Oh, sort of. Okay, anyway, so that's the Atlantean culture here. Okay, so did I talk about everything I was going to talk about? Yeah, so it's interesting how it all ties together, all these different cultures, they come from the same culture, and then they degenerated. Now, one interesting thing to trip out over that I like to think about is whenever I listen to all of these ancient Native American myths and legends of the details, because they go into pretty good detail, like this progression. Then there was peace, and then there was war between these two factions, and then there was and then you listen to their story and you say, okay, so this is the story that people would be left with 10,000 years after something happened. And to just calibrate your mind to that is trippy, because then you're going to know how quickly information unravels and turns into myth and legend. So, for example, the myth and legends of the ancient Greeks, they had their stories of the pantheon, that they did this, they did that, the war between the Titans and the Olympians. The Olympians were the children of the Titans, and they rebelled. Well, they also have that same story in America. One of the American legends was they were the giants who were the one group of people who rebelled against the other people, the ruling class, and then they had the wars and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, it's pretty similar. But I agree with Ignatius Daniel's point that Zeus and all these guys, it is a like the concept of God. Like if you're gonna have a conversation about what God and atheism, all this stuff, we really need to talk about what God is. Like, is God? Because people have this concept of God as being otherworldly and a magical thing because they had such amazing technology. You had to and it was a technology they could see in front of them all the time with the pyramids and all these amazing artifacts. And so, like Baalbek tomb and giant stones moving around, and also is alien visitations. Aliens came down and visited stuff all the time. When Alexander the Great was trying to besiege Tyre, a spaceship came out and blew away their wall for him. That's how Alexander the Great was able to besiege that place. He had help. That kind of stuff happened all the time. The guy who founded Rome, Romulus, was taken up in a whirlwind of a storm, just disappeared. And four prophets from the Old Testament disappeared that way: Ezekiel and Elijah and a few other. So so that's kind of why the concept of God got kind of distorted, and they kind of been like, oh wow, magical, but at the end of the day, what they were just the people who were the ruling class from in the times before the civilization fell. Now one interesting thing is all the different people in the world. And if you want, it's even written on Wikipedia. If you go back to the very origins of all the countries, all the old countries, Japan, China, India, but it's also on my timeline. Is that the ancient legendary gods? They leaders. They were like gods because they lived forever. They lived for like 20,000 years and stuff. Oh, and like Mona, the nectar of the gods from Greece, what they would drink to live forever. That story is told all the time in Egypt, that the gods would drink their special juice that would make them live. And the Egyptians were extremely conscious of what they ate. They were all vegetarians, or if they weren't vegetarians, or a lot of them were vegetarians. And if they weren't vegetarians, they were very healthy and very clean. And if anybody got sick, they believed it was because they weren't eating well enough. It was all about what you were eating, and they fasted all the time. Just like the Indians do. It was almost the same culture, but they also have that story in Native Americans that they had this special nectar of the gods juice. And what I think the nectar of the gods was it was like a fruit juice that they made, and because they realized that if you just drink very pure and eat pure, put no toxins in you, then there's nothing that's going to pollute your body from developing like mutations like cancer or sicknesses and stuff that's generally going to get in the way of the overall energy flow of your body, is by eating clean. And the Egyptians knew that, and the Atlanteans knew that, and that's what the nectar of the gods was. And that's probably how because the human body, I think, is designed, according to Ra, to live 900 years. So maybe they were living 900 years and stuff because they were eating so clean and they were living in a clean environment that wasn't toxic. And maybe our genetics, there's genetically you would mutate to live longer. But anyway, my point is that that's a common thing between Japan, China, Middle East, North America, is that they lived for a long time. And also that they were very large, but they also had the similar structure of head, a big flat forehead and a big nose. Ignatius Donnelly was talking about the flattening of the forehead technique where they deliberately flatten people's heads. They did that in Peru. They did that in North America. They did that, I think, in China, and we all know that they did that in Egypt. And so that was because these titans, these giant people, they had naturally flat heads, and they had, and I think maybe even a relationship to maybe the ruling class of Atlantis could have been the Jews, or maybe not just the ruling class, but just the central main race of Atlantis would be the Jews with the Junos, and that's related to the big flat nose of the flat forehead. Junos is related to the flat forehead and the flat nose of the, like Savonarola was an ancient Indian from India, Vedic philosopher, and he looked like a Jew from the side with his flat nose, and he looked exactly like what you would picture like a royal family member of ancient Peru. The royal family of ancient Peru was a little bit different from the other Peruvians. They were taller. They had the flat heads and the big nose. If you look at a Gloria Estefan video about Machu Picchu, the Peruvian male model she has is what I'm thinking of. Not your typical short, fat, pudgy, but like tall, like square kind of forehead, flat nose. And anyway, that's kind of like a similar motif you can connect. And so that's kind of like an ancient race you can think of. When you start thinking about race, I don't think you want to think about race kind of in the context of like the same races exist now as exists now. New races can pop out. Like if we were to suddenly lose our society, the North American will become the North American race. And we would look different, and it would just be a conglomeration of all the races we have now, the blacks and the reds, and we'd be a little bit different because we have a little more red and that kind of stuff. So back then you had different races. You had the Titans who looked really scary. Like they were really ugly. They had big flat noses, big heads. They had 2 rows of teeth. They had 6 fingers on each side. Now the whole story of 6 fingers, that's mentioned a couple times in the Old Testament in relation to giants. The giants in the Old Testament were 11 feet tall, like the Magog, the king of the Philistines, had a bed that was like 11 feet tall. He was like 10 feet tall. He had 6 fingers. Now, you have legends of 6-fingered giants in Americas as well. And you have mutants with 6 fingers, normal humans, in the Amazon rainforest with 6 fingers who have legends of their giant relatives who have 6 fingers. Now, how all of this connection without the whole world talking about it is pseudoscience is funny. I mean, and when you hear people say pseudoscience, they say pseudoscience, and then they don't say why. They're like, oh yeah, everybody says pseudoscience, so pseudoscience, beyond our contemplation, pseudoscience. I mean, the evidence is all over. Like, how about the Tiwanaku up on the plains of Bolivia with the puzzle pieces of the buildings, and then they were just blown apart somehow. It's like, look at stuff objectively. Look at how big the giant stones in Baalbek are. They're as big as buses. They're 900 tons, and they were dragged from miles away. Like how? So obviously, that's how people believe in gods. It's humans with superpowers. Now, in those days, to try to contemplate like exactly the details, all of that, it's so fragmentary, it's so distorted that I think it invites a whole lot of poetic license when you're going to start to when the common masses believe it enough to portray it in Hollywood. I think it'll be cool to create different kind of like really liberal sci-fi type of Hollywood movies based on what we know about Atlantis, and so you could make tribes of giants and stuff, kicking ass, running through, rampaging, which we already do, but then you could try to make it kind of more realistic and make it more realistic year by year, and then maybe we'll all kind of subconsciously, with all of our agreement with making the different movies, decide on how it really was. But see, that kind of explains the Amazons. Remember the Amazons? Well, the Amazons existed from prehistoric times, and by the time, Herodotus and those guys, there weren't like giant tribes of women around, but there were tribes of women in the area where the giant Amazons were when Alexander the Great was taking over the world, and he traveled through modern day Armenia. He met with the tribe of Amazons, or the Amazons were still there. And so let me tell you what I think the Amazons were. The Amazons were like, there were tribes of these giants, but giant numbers began to get dwindled because they were outcasts because everybody hated them because they were elitists, and also because they were big and they probably bullied people because they were big. So you have these tribes of giants as they get smaller and smaller. Then you have like one tribe of giant men. They go off on a war path to go destroy, and then they get killed. So now their women are left alone. And that actually was a specific story with one of the tribes in that same area. It was in Armenia, where the men, and actually it was the story of women. Yeah, the Amazon women, where their men, I don't remember what it was, where in the book it was, but their men had taken off to go on a warpath somewhere to take over, to go on to war, join an army to try to fight, I think it was the Egyptians. And they all got killed and they never came back. So the women were there, left alone. And so, a lot of times the women are left alone. They miss their husbands. They don't want to get in with new husbands. And so they just decide to make a woman country. And then the other women around find out about it, and they get abandoned by their men because they get killed in the war. So then they move to that country. And so that the numbers, it turns into like a self-feeding system that stays alive for a long-ass time because it's this place everybody knows where the women can go whenever their men die or if they don't like men. And so there was like, and then all the men around the area, all the tribes and the countries around them kind of treat them as kind of like how America treats like a Native American tribe. It's like within your domain, but it's kind of like a semi-autonomous domain. Because men like that, dude. Men love it when women make their own little shit and try to be like men and stuff. It's we get off on that. It's fun to watch. And so they had plenty of support, I'm sure. But as far as like Amazons, I think that's probably what it was. It was just a tribe of giants who now is only women left, and so then they were gonna get revenge on all the other little men who killed their big husbands or whatever. And then over time, those bloodlines kind of melt back into the common society. But the way that bloodline works is that you only have to have like a direct ancestor to have a certain blood personality trait or physical trait in order for you to have it. You don't have to have like a whole bunch of people that have it. Only one person needs to have it for that gene to go through. If a whole bunch of people have it, it increases the chances that you're going to have it, but it doesn't mean that you have to have like a whole bunch of people. So that means that kind of lends to the tradition that actually ancient Atlanteans had, or ancient people all over the world that we attribute to Atlanteans had, where people were not allowed to marry outside of or within their family. That's an ancient Hebrew belief, and lots of tribes in India, in America. And I think that was to try to spread the culture, to try to keep from, and maybe even to try to spread the Atlantean bloodline. I don't know. Maybe it's like a bloodline that has a certain catalyst that makes you remember your past lives. And if you spread that bloodline around, then you can help people wake up, and you do that by intermarrying other races, by making laws that you can't marry your own husband or brother or sister. But anyways, that whole law that existed all throughout the world. Now every single group of people we can think of have lines to the ancient Atlanteans. For example, the Celts had knew a lot about astrology. The Julian calendar from ancient Rome, named after Julius Caesar because he invented it. He brought that back from Gaul, from France, because he learned it from the Celts. You could say, they lived farther north, so they had more accurate data, but they also, I think, they learned a lot of it because and this is I think a chapter in Ignatius Donnelly's book talking about Ireland. Ireland had stories of people coming from the east coast, from the west coast across the sea, a lot. And they came, the Tuatha De Danann, and they came and they fought, and but then the Milesians or whoever's there, but then they saw that they spoke the same language, so then they became friends, and they wondered why they spoke the same language, even though these people came from way over across the ocean, But I mean, the whole culture of Northeastern Europe and Western Europe is the kind of the same thing as the mound culture. Is they were only, instead of building mounds, they were building stuff out of rocks. It was called the monolithic culture. That's when Stonehenge came. Stonehenge has always been there. People think Stonehenge was built like 1500 BC, but how the fuck did you build Stonehenge? It was big. It was the ancient Atlantean culture, the people who knew how to build this stuff, who did build this stuff, building houses out of rock and not out of stone, try to make something that's permanent. So yeah, anyways, you should read the book. It's amazing. I need to read it again. But basically, just to end the video, my main kind of moral of the story is that this world, it grows, it crashes, it grows, it crashes. We have all this mixture of all these different people living here. So I think this is the place where y'all get to learn to get along and to kind of look at other people, only the positive viewpoint. thing about them, because you don't know how old or young that soul is. They could be a really old soul that's just from a really weird place that they honed in that one particular skill on whatever planet they can see. Because when you have like a place like planet Earth that has all of these different people living here on this planet who had lived in other planets that had been destroyed, what you're doing is you're creating a place that has lots of different people. So you're kind of like creating like this big red beacon light throughout the entire universe saying, Freako's here, come here if you are Freako. And so the Freakos come here because they have no place else to go. It's like the refugee planet to all the other people whose planets blew up, but then they didn't get to have another planet made for them because their populations weren't big enough, or because they're just weird souls. From the reason that soul got stuck in one thing on cycle forever and ever and ever and ever, and karma, and so honed at one skill really good. So that's probably why you have really, in this world right now, a lot of really smart people whose brains work good and they know how to, or their brains work in a good way, so they know how to make a lot of money, but they're total fucking sociopaths. You know what I mean? Or you have totally smart people who are really nice and really sweet and really giving, but you can't really hold a two-way conversation with them because their brains don't really work that good. You know, so but why would you say that the smart person who's not so smart is a younger soul than the sociopath with a lot of money? You know, it's no use. Just give up on that. Just let's assume we're all the same age soul. We're just different skill set because we're all a bunch of freakos with all special skill set, and we're all trying to get along. And so, you know, so you don't have to get mad at anybody. Like the sociopath with the money, just recognize him for what he is. He's just completely oblivious on this side, retarded, and his brain works like a computer on this side. So just talk to him. Talk to this side. Talk to the retarded side when you're trying to try to talk sense into him. And then if you want him to be friends, whatever, then you can talk to this side. But you don't have to get all pissed off at people and say, oh, you know, all bad, or you're a doom, or I'm not going to talk to you, not be your friend, or whatever. This is the place where we all try to get along, I think. And it's also an interesting situation where we're in now, where people don't seem to want to see the truth. I mean, he wrote that book in 1870. I'm kind of wondering how long it's going to take for people to pay attention to this stuff and talk about it and believe it, because it seems abundantly obvious to me. Yet, you know, and the reason that people can't, you know, I think people are going to believe it and don't believe it is because you can't have a two-way conversation with people about this stuff. Because they don't know, and if they do know, they go, okay, well, I guess I'll have to think about it. They don't know. Nobody taught them. Nobody told them. They don't know anything about this shit. It's not in our schools. It's not written in any of the books. So anyways, whenever I get around to it, I want to rewrite all of the textbooks of America, dude. If I could rewrite the textbooks of America, bam, dude. That would be fun, but damn, people would be smart. So anyways, that's what I think about Atlantis. The Antediluvian World by Ignatius Donnelly, written in 1887. And then this video was also a lot about Herodotus, because he's talking about history. And that's a good go-to book for history to kind of cross-reference. I'm making with my website right now a cross-reference. Everything that Ignatius Donnelly says in his book, I'm going to have on, like the myths and legends. I'm going to have the entire myth and legend on my website, so that you can click to it and reference it and read it within its context, because stuff carries more weight within its context. And I'm going to have the pictures of everything aligned right next to it, so that you can see what they're talking about. And I don't know, maybe open a little bit of minds, and we'll open up the conversation. Or maybe, who knows what happens. All right, peace out.